It's week 9 NFL, and we are back in our regular slot on Tuesday. And I greatly appreciate all the people that reached out and just infuriated and just completely perturbed. We were not on last Tuesday. It wasn't my fault. Anyway, Ron, good to see you back in action. Another fervorless holiday prevented us from being here last Tuesday. Let's get right into it. Trade deadline just passed.
All right. So you want to talk about the trades first?
I'm not going to talk about your vacation like everybody else does on every other show, they waste everybody's time.
My vacation in Las Vegas? That was a vacation. That was work.
Yeah.
Okay, let me make an opening statement first about the trades, because we saw 8 of them, actually about 9 of them today. About 5 or 6 years ago, we used to see 2 or 3 at the most on the trade day, but everything's changing. And one of the reasons, and I heard somebody else talk about this as well, is there are younger GMs now staffing these NFL teams. And they're treating this almost like fantasy football in a way. They saw what the Rams did last year. They've seen organizations go from first to last and last to first, and they're not afraid to trade draft capital. And there are 2 ways of going about it. The Rams were in winning mode now, and you see the Ravens and some of the other teams in winning mode right now. And then you take a look at what we're going to talk about with the Bears, and they're stockpiling picks for later. They're trading some of their better players, their better linebackers. But the bottom line is, teams are more likely to trade at the NFL trading deadline than ever before.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it, work well for the Rams. We saw San Francisco start the ball rolling, basically. I think you really have to make those moves at this point because the windows are so narrow. We see from year to year that teams can change. Look at the Bungles and the Rams. Neither one of them are above 500 at this point, and they were in the Super Bowl last year. So you've got to make these moves.
Yeah, we saw a couple of fourth seeded teams go to the Super Bowl last year. The Rams were the 4th seed and Cincinnati was the 4th seed. In the NFC Championship, it was a number 4 against a number 6, maybe even a number 7. It was the Rams and San Francisco. San Francisco was obviously a wild card team at that point. So the trick is, if you think you could get in the playoffs, then you make a move to get in the playoffs. If you don't think you could get in the playoffs, then you build for the future. At least that would be my game plan as a GM. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about Bradley Chubb going to Miami. He goes from Denver to Miami. The cost was a 1st-round pick, a 4th-round pick in 2024, and a running back, Chase Edmonds, who is odd man out in Miami, especially with another trade that went down. What's your take on the Chubb deal?
I don't think Miami's close enough to be making these moves. Do you?
Miami has to now empty the pocketbook. They've done it they did it for Tyreek Hill. They have to do it in the future for Tua, and now they're going to have to do it for Chubb to make this work. Denver gets needed draft capital. They weren't going to sign Chubb to a longer-term contract. Good for Denver. Good for Miami if they sign him to a long-term contract. The coaching staff has a lot of good players in place right now. Kind of a Ram situation where they're going to be top-heavy in a couple of years, and they'll have to pay these guys so much money that their depth will take a hit.
Yeah, I just don't. I just don't see it for Miami unless it works out this year. Would you agree?
Okay. That's fair. And I don't know if it works out this year, but it puts Miami in a much better position to make the playoffs, because I thought it was about 50-50 before the Chubb trade.
Well, certainly it's going to improve their team. It just, these teams mortgaging their future with the, loss of draft picks, it really puts them in a tough spot. I like the moves and obviously we're going to get into it. I like the moves for Detroit and Chicago. Obviously Denver's, getting some draft capital. So I like how these teams are acquiring draft capital more than players, quite frankly.
Yeah, because what you're going to see with the Rams, when Stafford's done, they're going to have to start all over at quarterback with a roster that's kind of depleted with all their moves. It can really backfire in a hurry. And they were just lucky circumstance to make it all the way to the Super Bowl. Let's get into the Lions right now. TJ Hawkinson stays in the division. And
Who would have ever thought Hawkinson would have been traded?
Yeah, somebody said he would, but in the division to the Vikings give up a second round pick and a third round pick in the 2024 draft, but they also get a third round pick and a conditional fourth round pick. In a sense,
yeah, but that's going to be a fifth round pick.
Okay, well, regardless, they're trading. The Lions did not add any number. They didn't increase the number of draft picks they got. They moved up about 30 spots, if that, because the Vikings are going to finish higher than the Lions. This was basically a giveaway from the Lions. And I think this is far, far, far from a win-win situation. This is the Lions making a horrendous mistake.
It's funny because the Detroit media doesn't have a problem with this. And I do. I think that I agree with you, Ron. I don't think that they got enough for it. Hawkinson, I don't know why you would trade the guy in the same division. They haven't traded somebody within their division in 24 years, since 1998. And it's just not a good idea to have a player like that thrown in your face twice a year because he's a good player. I don't think he's a great player, but he's a good player. And as we've talked about previously, I think tight ends are so undervalued. If you know how to use a tight end. And Minnesota was desperate. They just lost their tight end last week. They had to replace him. So I agree with you. I think they came up short on this trade, unfortunately. It does leave the Lions with 5 of the top 65 draft picks as they sit right now in the upcoming draft, which is kind of interesting. But I still think they got shorted on this.
Yeah, if you look at draft position as it stands right now, Minnesota's draft pick might be in the high 50s. Yeah. And Detroit's draft pick might be in the medium 60s. They basically traded up 10 spots. And Hawkinson was the number 8 pick in the draft when he came out, which is pretty high for a tight end. And like you said, tight ends are undervalued. The Vikings, Irv Smith, I've heard that he'll be out from 8 to 10 weeks. It's just, it's not just this 4-week IR. He's expected to miss 8 weeks. And to add another weapon. And you pointed out before how productive Hawkinson has been on a team that is kind of short of wideout and tight end talent. And they're going to take another hit here. So I think it's embarrassing personally.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think I just don't understand. I follow a lot of beat writers and it seems like it's politics. It's like they have this group think and they all have to agree with each other. And I haven't seen, too many people talking about it being a bad thing. And I looked at it and I'm like, okay, well, they got a third and a fourth. That's okay. And then when I see, oh, well, no, we're giving up draft picks. No. Would you have done that trade if we got the third and the fourth?
And not give up any draft picks?
Right. Oh, no, they got a second and a third, I mean.
Right. I would have done it if they got it in the same draft. Second and a third from one draft. I don't want a second 1 year and a third the next year.
And I don't think we should have given them anything else.
No, basically you gave them up for nothing because right. If you're talking about 10 or 15 at the most draft picks later based on their records right now, and that's nothing. It depends on how well you draft.
I think I think the other concern was that Hawkinson was going to be a contract concern next year. I mean, they did the 5th-year option before they shipped him to Minnesota, but the year after that, he's going to command big bucks. So
I've got a real problem with it because they should have paid him. They're going to get a rookie quarterback in 2023 on a rookie quarterback contract. I don't see the issue with money. Cap money is going to go up like crazy again next year.
I think it's a great move for the Vikings. I'm just happy I had the Vikings -3 when it opened, and I see some 4s popping up, and That's the only wager I have this week. I like the Vikings. A lot of people are down on them. I tweeted out. We'll talk about it later. We'll get back to that Green Bay Minnesota line later. I'm getting a lot of flack on that one. Let's
Okay.
and just so everybody knows, we got a lot of other stuff to talk about besides these trades. Very interesting thing coming up, which is the 3 things each of us have learned this year from the NFL season, which I think is going to be very interesting discussing. Go ahead with trade talk.
Okay, this is a quickie. You don't even have to comment on it, but William Jackson goes from Washington. He wanted out. He's a cornerback. He's decent. He has a large contract. Pittsburgh is willing to take on that contract. The only reason I mention it is because Pittsburgh's not very good at drafting defensive backs, but they're very good at plucking defensive backs from other teams. So we already saw them with Fitzpatrick. They took Micah Fitzpatrick. He's been a superstar. He was drafted by Miami. They traded for him. Now they trade for William Jackson. Not much to say about it, but it's a decent move for Pittsburgh in the future. Speaking of Pittsburgh, what do you think of Claypool, their wide receiver, going from Pittsburgh to Chicago for a 2nd-round pick?
I think that is okay because Pickett wasn't using him at all. He was kind of lost in the shuffle there, and Chicago is in dire need to improve on offense. I don't see a problem with that at all.
Yeah, I like it from both standpoints. I think he's going to command a large contract. He's already said, I deserve a large contract, which I would disagree with, but that's what he said. He dropped too many passes in Pittsburgh. He didn't separate in Pittsburgh, but he's a tall target that fits for Justin Fields in Chicago. I think he's a better fit in Chicago than he was in Pittsburgh. They drafted a wide receiver to take over for him, and he's learning pretty fast. So there wasn't room for him in Pittsburgh. And the 2nd-round pick seems fair enough. So I'm good with that. We should talk about Chicago some more, though, because they add a wide receiver, but they dropped 2 linebackers. So they're obviously looking more for the future. Quinn and Roquan Smith yesterday, he was traded for a 2nd and a 5th to Baltimore. And this is rent a player for Baltimore because I don't think they're going to sign him after this year. But as it was pointed out, Baltimore traded a 2nd and a 5th, but it's not really a 2nd and a 5th because if they don't sign him after the year, they're going to get a compensatory 3rd-round pick back from the NFL. And Baltimore schemes the system better than any other team. If you remember, they had 6 picks in the 4th round last year, which is incredible. So they're really giving up a 2nd and a 5th for a 3rd in this trade to get somebody who they think could put them over the top. Meanwhile, Chicago wasn't going to sign him, and they get 2 more draft picks that hopefully they won't waste.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it fits well for both teams. It just disconcerting last weekend to see, the Bears fall apart on defense already, missing just Quinn. So
they're calling it quits maybe for this year. They'll try hard, but there aren't a lot of bodies left in the experience department that's going to help them through the season. They have a long-range plan, and I'm okay with that.
I don't think they're calling it quits yet. I think they're working on their offense and they're retooling and they're still making some improvements. I don't think they're quits yet.
No, I don't mean trying hard quits. And I agree with you. They're working on their offense. I think teams want to be offensive minded and they think they could plug and play defensively with draft picks down the road. So I agree with you, but I think they're willing to sacrifice some wins this year by losing 2 experienced linebackers to help them in the long run.
Yeah, and higher scoring is more exciting for everybody anyway.
For everybody but me.
The worse their defense is, the more work Fields gets to get in this year.
Yeah, I have something to say about that, but that's right. Okay, so we're not done with Miami. They made a trade and they traded Chase Edmonds in the Bradley Chubb deal, but they had something else in mind. And remember, their coach was the coordinator in San Francisco, and he got Jeff Wilson, who is obviously expendable because Jeff Mitchell will be coming off injury in a couple weeks. And they have some guy named McCaffrey, somebody like that, I think. So they're set.
I think his dad's a head coach or a coordinator in
Yeah.
the college and just got a free pass or
Yeah,
something.
an all-around nice guy or something. So basically, I didn't see the draft compensation, but I like the move. San Francisco gets whatever they get for him, and they needed some draft choices because they expended some draft choices. And Miami instantly upgrades at running back. Their running game was pretty much garbage so far this year. Mostart also from San Francisco. Just I think the offensive line isn't opening enough holes for him, but the combination of the former San Francisco guys, Mozart and Wilson, and with everything else they have on offense, I think it's a pretty good move for both.
Sure.
Let's talk gambling a little bit. So let's talk Calvin Ridley. He placed a
Yeah.
few bets in Miami, and now he's leaving. He's goes from Miami to Jacksonville. So he goes from Atlanta to Jacksonville. So he's in the state,
Yeah,
Florida, where he placed the
they trade
bets.
him to a state that doesn't have gambling, and he was suspended for the year for gambling on the Atlanta Jacksonville game.
Yeah, so this is almost karma here. So here he goes to Jacksonville. Obviously, he's not playing this year, and he has to be reinstated next year, which he probably will be. You know, he is a number one talent. He's going to be Jacksonville's top wide receiver. So it's not a bad move for roster purposes for Jacksonville. And Atlanta was never going to have him anymore. And I think that it's very weird contract, but a very weird trade details, but it could be anywhere from a second to a fourth round pick, depending on playing time and if they win a playoff game. There's so many things going in there. It's creative trade value. But I think Jacksonville did all right in this deal.
Yeah, no, I think so. You'd think the guy would come back, learn his lesson, and bear down. What I don't know what his contract situation is, though.
It's considering that all the millions of dollars that were paid to these guys who left at the end of last year happened after Ridley signed a contract. I think it's probably favorable. And I think Ridley's bargaining power is kind of null and void after missing a year in the NFL. So I think Jacksonville, who's overpaid anyway, based on last year's free agency, can cut a deal that's marketable for him. One more to go, and that's it.
Today broke the record for the most NFL trades on the trade deadline, 10.
Yeah, it's those young GMs. Here's a trade that seems to be under the radar, but it's just another win for Buffalo, I think. The pass-catching running back Hines from Indianapolis was traded to Buffalo for Zach Moss, who was basically inactive the last 3 weeks once they were using their rookie Cook and Singletary, and all they're doing is passing anyway. But Hines brings a third down and pass-catching dimension that Buffalo doesn't really have right now. And Indy gets Zach Moss behind their stud running back Taylor. So Indy basically gave away Hines for almost nothing.
Well, they fired their offensive coordinator this morning. Another loss in the bank, an ugly loss. Are they in rebuild mode now officially? Didn't we talk about this last week? That I thought the Colts are closer to rebuild than playoffs.
They want to think they're still in the playoffs because are they 3-4-1, something like that, and 3-4-1, still playing. Well, they lost 2 to Tennessee. That didn't help. But if they could load up on Jacksonville and Houston, they still probably think they're a playoff type team. Maybe they are. Everybody else is 4-3, 4-4, but they've got to play better on the field.
Well, we got Tennessee with the 29th, or with the fourth hardest schedule remaining, and Indianapolis is at 24. So they both have similar schedules remaining, and Indianapolis can't qualify as a wild card. Their season's done.
Well, we may think so, but they're not yet.
Well, they're delusional. You have a Miami Dolphins fun fact for us?
Yeah, so I got this. I'm going to read this to you. When San Francisco traded up to get Trey Lance, who unfortunately his career is derailed right now, the Dolphins got 3 first-round picks for him. They kept not one of those 3 first-round picks. So Trey Lance went to San Francisco. Miami got Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, and Bradley Chubb with those 3 picks.
So the teeter-totter's a little off though on that, right?
Yeah.
Value.
That is, when you think about it, maybe this guy, this GM for Miami, Chris Greer, maybe he knew something going in, but those are 3 all-star performers for an untested rookie.
I'm trying to compare what the San Francisco did there, and it reminds me of the Detroit Pistons when they won the the NBA championship, and they had the number 2 pick, and instead of taking Carmelo Anthony, they took Darko Milicic. And it's just, a good team making a bad move and completely wasting, their draft capital that could have really kept them in a stronger position for years to come. And it just, that whole situation reminds me of that. And the Trey Lance thing isn't, we're only on the first chapter of that story.
Yeah.
So, but it's
I think it was a little overpay at the time for San Francisco, but quarterbacks drive the league, and Trey Lance has the measurables that the NFL now likes, mobile quarterbacks, but he just doesn't have enough work in, and unfortunately, he's not going to get any work in this year.
All right, you gave me a homework assignment, Ron, and you're going to kick it off. The homework assignment was, what 3 things have we learned this year? So I've got banners for my stuff, and here's your banner for this. Go ahead with your first item that you've learned.
Okay. My first item is kind of a repeat item that I would use every year. Young teams still aren't getting over the hump. They're making mistakes when games are in hand. You could call it, for gamblers, bad gambling luck, but learning how to win is not easy. Carolina made some bonehead decisions last week. I think a lot of that is youth and inexperience. The Jets, with the big penalty that completely changed the game, chance to go up 17-3 with a pick 6, and they make the big mistake.
Awful.
The Jags are just burning money as a favorite, right? And they should be completely competitive with these other teams, but you're seeing young teams with a lot of moving parts. Houston example, when you have 30 new people on your roster, it just doesn't flow, and teams need time to do this. The Lions take a 14-0 lead, and you knew that it wasn't going to be safe with that defense. So I think we just have to get used to that teams are going to make mistakes when they're young, when they're building, when they have new GMs, new coaches, new quarterbacks, and so on. That's my first observation.
I want to let's use this opportunity to talk about Jacksonville. I sent out a tweet basically with the Brokeback Mountain theme of I just can't quit you, Jacksonville. They're driving me nuts, and the metrics for Jacksonville are just off the charts. And I want your opinion. Okay. Trevor Lawrence was a guaranteed cannot miss draft pick. I mean, mortgage the farm to get him. Can't miss. And this guy does the dumbest things and just is so unimpressive. He hasn't done anything in critical situations. What am I missing here? What has transpired from his college days to his NFL days that makes him look like a complete imbecile? I mean, I think a little background. He threw an interception. They were up 7-0 on the 1 yard line, and he throws an interception in quintuple coverage. It was incredulous.
Yeah, I think thinks he's still in college where the separation is a little easier, and he doesn't realize how fast NFL defensive backs are and how savvy NFL safeties in the cover 2. I mean, it's just a different game. And I think he has gunslinger to him. We know there's been a lot of quarterbacks that have had bad first and second years. Peyton Manning, Troy Aikman, and so on way back when. So I wouldn't give up on him. He wasn't an Andrew Luck candidate coming out of college as somebody who's done all these draft analysis and so on. He was worthy of the number one pick, in my opinion, but he was still a work in progress. He was certainly not an Andrew Luck for me coming out. I think you got to work with him a little more. I think he's got to get used to his wide receivers. He's got to get a better offensive line. Yeah, you got to tell me when the tight end play is going to be a little bit more relevant. So he had the one benefit he had with Urban Meyer is that he played all 16 or 17 games last year. So he has a lot of games under his belt. I fully expect improvement next year. And if we don't get it, then we've got a problem. This year is still a learning year with a new staff.
No, I didn't really pay attention to him as much as as most people did in college. He was a runner in college, wasn't he? He's not running the ball at all in the NFL.
He ran only to escape trouble. He was not a runner per se,
right.
But the lanes really opened up. He would be more of an Andrew Luck type in that respect. Andrew Luck could certainly run the football when he wanted to, but he would prefer to use his arm strength to thread the needle. Trevor Lawrence thinks he has the same arm strength, and he probably does, but he's not threading the needle.
It seems like every couple of weeks somebody's complaining, that he could have ran for a first down, and instead he's, throwing a pick or a blooper that lands astray. Do you think that could possibly be a coaching mandate to not run?
It doesn't bother me that he doesn't run, and here's where Calvin Ridley could really help him next year.
Yeah.
You got a bona fide target to go with the other guys who are more suited to be number 2 and number 3 guys. And we have some guys that are disappearing as wide receivers on this team right now.
I'm going to go with the first thing that I think that stands out to me the most. And it's a little bit of a repetitive thing, but I'll put it into more context. And that is the value of networking. And it is, you see a lot of pundits or people like ourselves, people that have media access, that could be an imbecile like me and a brilliant guy like you, getting airtime and instant credibility. I have found that networking with the average person has been very, very beneficial. The way that people have contacted me on Twitter, the Discord channel. I invite everybody to join the Discord channel for a free exchange of ideas. There's a hell of a lot of sharp people out there that are just, doing their own thing and know a hell of a lot more than I do in some respects on certain things, and a hell of a lot more than some of the people we see in media, various forms of media. And they're just quietly working, beneath the scenes and doing great work. And I have had a lot of benefit from just networking with different people and a free exchange of ideas privately, because they teach me some things and I teach them some things that we may not necessarily want to go public, but there's a trust factor of an exchange of ideas. And, that's been very rewarding for me this year, particularly.
So a little backstory there. 13 months ago, go back 13 months ago, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now, except for that you recommended me to teach a class on college football handicapping. And I said, okay, I can put something together. I've been doing this under the radar, like you said, for so many years, and happy with that. Getting information here and there, but really doing my own thing with my power ratings, with my metrics, with my situations, and blending them all together. But I found out that I guess I did have something to share and some real opinions. But more than that, it started to open the door for networking with the right people. You mentioned also with kind of average or hearing other opinions that way, but I got a chance also to network with some smart people as well, so that I can fine tune some things. And then that just led to some of the stuff we did in the summer and some of the other ways to analyze games, because for me, it was never speaking about it. It was always writing, and then sharing my writing with a very few Anywhere from 3 to 6 or 7 people is what I shared my writing with on a weekly basis. So this has been rewarding for me. I've done it in the prop market where I have just 1 or 2 people that I share some stuff and they share with me some stuff about props in order to get an edge and to get confirmation as far as some of the things I'm looking at. And it's the same with any kind of plays. The one area that I go completely on my own are with future plays for the most part, with season wins and player props and stuff like that. But everything else, it's really opened up the door. These videos and the stuff that you had me, said, why don't you do this? And I thank you for that.
Yeah, and it's, I think that we've taken a different slant, and I've seen some other shows or forums kind of mimic what we started, and that is working on air. And we don't talk before, we don't prep. What you see is what we get. We literally speak for 2 minutes before we get on air and create a banner or two, and everything that we're talking about is updating each other and bouncing different ideas off of each other. Mm-hmm. And we're working on air. We're not wasting time just BSing and preparing for a prepared type content. This is work. And everybody gets the benefit from watching us kind of discuss stuff. And yeah, we'll elaborate a little bit where we wouldn't if we were in private, but nevertheless, it still benefits both of us. What's your number 2 thing? Okay,
so number 2 thing, and this is stunning to me in the offensive football that we're having, but it's something you talking about brainstorming, but something I've seen because I'm recording stats all the time. More teams than ever are taking the air out of the ball. I've never seen fewer passing attempts in the NFL. It's just crazy. Now, I understand it from if a quarterback's not ready, like a Justin Fields, or if they don't trust a quarterback because they're young, Willis and so on. And we've talked about this. Every turnover in my metrics is worth 3.5 points. So if you're throwing the ball up for grabs like a Trevor Lawrence, you're wasting 3.5 points. Or Zach Wilson did that last week, with his turnovers against New England. So some examples. Tennessee had Willis throw 10 passes for 55 yards, and they won the game. Chicago with Fields has been down double digits twice this year. In one of the games, they were down double digits in the second quarter. They threw 13 passes in that whole game. They still weren't willing to let them pass. Let me skip Daniel Jones. One of the reasons for their success is they're putting him out of harm's way. They're not letting him take the risks that they used to take. They're relying on coaching and better positioning, and Marcus Mariota is the exact same thing. You seldom see him pass more than 25 times in the game, where the Bradys and the Rodgers and quarterbacks like that, Ben Roethlisberger, they were throwing 40 passes a game. Mahomes still throws 45 passes a game. Drew Brees threw that many passes. So they're taking the air out of the ball. And what's stunning to me is the way Green Bay did it with Aaron Rodgers a couple of nights ago. Down 16 or 17 points, maybe even 19 points, and they had 9 runs and 2 passes and a 6-minute drive that ended in whatever it ended in. Didn't even end in a touchdown, I think. It's just stunning the way teams are not moving the ball through the air like they used to.
Could this be some sort of insight of not putting it seems obvious that they're making a concerted effort to not put these quarterbacks in a position where there's a high likelihood of failure and backfiring. Let's look at Geno Smith. Geno Smith, came into the league in a position in a no-win situation, and and everybody's shocked that he's able to do what he's able to do in Seattle. I mean, when he was written off originally, because he was put in a position to fail, he wasn't given a fair shake and the benefit of the doubt. And, he was cast aside. So, maybe these head coaches are being pretty wise here and saying, hey, listen, we've got some talent here. Let's not put too much weight on them at this point. Let's let them, go. Let's baby them a little bit more than we used to. What do you think?
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up Seattle, because if you remember, their very first game was at home. Russell Wilson was coming back with Denver to play them. And all I could think about was that Geno Smith was going to go run heavy against Denver. And he came out and they threw something like 17 passes in the first half, 18-9. It was a completely unexpected game plan. It caught me off guard. Knowing what I know now about Denver's coaches, I'm sure it caught them off guard as well. And they went on to win. They actually did not commit any second half mistakes. They actually took the air out of the ball in the second half, sat on the lead, almost got them in trouble. But they didn't make mistakes. And since then, Geno Smith has proven to be worth the time that they invested in them. And Pete Carroll's not afraid to go contradictory to what other people have done. He started Russell Wilson over an experienced veteran when he was drafted right away. And he said Geno Smith's going to win the job. People were saying, oh, how can you do that? And look what's happened.
I telegrammed you a query. Did you look it up? Is the average pass attempt reduced this year significantly? The distance?
For these teams that are taking the air out of the ball, absolutely. For
the NFL as a whole.
As a whole, yes, I would say yes. But they're also, notice yards per carry running the ball is sky high the last 2 years, and it's even higher this year because these RPOs and these running quarterbacks are creating opportunities via the run. It's very interesting to watch the run yards per carry, which never moved for 19 straight years. I used to send you that chart at the beginning of the year, and it was always 4.1 or 4.2. And now it's moving up into the 4.4 range, and that doesn't sound like much, but it's significantly different than it was. It's absolutely unbelievable the way that short passes are becoming. If you're not running the ball, you're using the short RPO passes to act like a run.
Do you think that that's a matter of there was a shift where the coaches needed to draft their secondaries and their cornerbacks and kind of prevent the passing game because the passing game was just, lights out, and now they ignored the interior and now the interiors are weak on a lot of these teams?
Yeah, it's a lot of ebb and flow, checks and balances. Sometimes it's a good offensive lineman draft. Sometimes it's a good cornerback draft. But a lot of it has to do with the schemes that are being played. People are preventing the big pass these days. They're putting more people back there. And some of it has to do with rules. Rules have been favoring offenses for so many years. They want scoring. They want viewership. They get points, sells tickets, and prints money for the NFL. So they're creating these situations where pass interference calls are made and holding calls are not made as much offensively. So they're just taking advantage of moving the pocket and doing these little things. The game has evolved into a blending of the college game with the NFL game. And I think the NFL is taking some college concepts and moving it to the NFL.
That's going to lead perfectly into one of my number two thing that I've learned, and you didn't even know what it was. And that is the NFL we knew it, did not return to normal post-COVID era. And this year, and I believe it may never return to normal as what we saw the game as 3-4 years ago. The variance is just absurd on some of these situations. I mean, I consider myself lucky to be up for the year, frankly, with the bizarre results that have happened. Even though Jacksonville's cost me everything, every week, there's just no predicting. I was listening to a podcast this morning and the Ross Tucker show, and it was spoken about. You had, you had two monumental events in the same week where you have 2 7-point favorites lose by 18 or more. And Fezzik was mentioning the odds on that being like 1 in hundreds, and those events happened on the same day. And I'm sure there's a hell of a lot more other things that are happening along the similar vein, so to speak. there's a lot of unpredictability in some of these results that we're hearing it on a lot of shows, and people know that it's happening, and it's hard to put your finger on it. It's just not the same. There's something different with variants and things that are not expected, more so, considerably more so than ever. I mean, the teasers, the long teasers aren't close to covering at a rate that is profitable. It's like 67% last time I looked. And there's just a lot of goofy things happening. You have so many games not even close to the spread.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you've hit it in terms of how COVID has changed the preseason. They don't hit anymore. They're very comfortable now with having that week off between the start of the regular season and the end of the preseason. We're playing 3 preseason games, and the starters missed. We went over this: how many quarterbacks missed, how many starters didn't suit up. And then you take into something that we talked about last week, and I queried out to a couple of other people as well, waiting for the results. Whatever happens in week 1, you could pretty much throw out. Week 1 is an anomaly all the time. And we kind of said on air, what if you threw out week 1 data? Would that be better?
I don't want to do that because, you have a lot of teams that did play their best. And you had a lot of teams not in a position to play their best, so to speak. And, there was talk, about, well, should we throw out the Raiders stats from last week against the Saints because they had the flu and they no-showed, couldn't score. And, was such a wide variance to what they've done in previous games. I don't think you can just throw that stuff out the window.
No, you can't throw mid-season results out, unless you have Denver's what was a couple years ago because of COVID protocol. They had a guy who'd never played quarterback. He was a back. Yeah, you could throw that week out, but that's a completely different story. That was kind of weird. But that overreaction week after week 1, I tend not to change power numbers, for example, after week 1, unless I see something really crazy, because it's just doesn't fit the narrative that teams that win their first game often in an upset often end up winning 2 or 3 the rest of the year, and that's it. You can learn some things, but most likely it's better for us to evaluate how the preseason went and to see if we can get a leg up on which teams are ready to go week 1 and which teams are not. And that, I think, and we discussed this all summer, there were some lines that I thought were absolutely beautiful. And week 1 has been a very big moneymaker for me, and I think for us over the years, because I think we're ahead of the game, ahead of the curve on that. But how we incorporate week 1 the rest of the way has changed, in my opinion, going back to your point.
Okay, it's turkey time. What's your third strike here?
Okay, third is basically just player-based. I'm going to make a general statement that people should probably agree with me on. Christian McCaffrey is good at football. Simple as that. How does he go from one team to another, learn the playbook? He plays on a Sunday, then he's got to come back and play. Now he's throwing a pass. They're doing all these creative things without even having the game plan for a team, the Rams, who are rested for a full week. Yeah, so they had 2 weeks to prepare for him. Yeah. And Christian McCaffrey still does anything and everything on him. Now, I expected this to work for San Francisco, but I expected it to work now, not last week. I'm just amazed at that happen. That's just an observation that if you have a creative coach and you have a creative player that you're trading for, like a Tyreek Hill to Miami, which has really worked out because that staff knows how to work with the offense. And then you have the San Francisco staff that remains, Shanahan, who knows how to work with guys like McCaffrey. The balance of power in the NFC West has completely flipped based on last week's result.
Well, and we appreciate the people that reached out to us because to remind us that we did mention on the Friday show to expect the unexpected, and that San Francisco was going to come out with some unexpected trick plays and some unexpected schemes that the Rams would not be able to prepare for. And sure enough, that's what happened. So we appreciate the people that reached out and reminded us that we did say that. And patting ourselves on the back again. Number 3 for me is by far the most important thing that I'm working on, and that is finding ways to bet the games in roundabout ways and in different styles. And like this past week, everything just worked marvelous for me with the alternative ways that I attacked what I did. And for example, I had some insecurity with the Jacksonville game, and I'm like, well, I feel like I'm wasting a play here because they may lose a close game, but they're not going to get blown out. How else can I protect myself in this game? And I'm thinking, and then I'm looking at Philadelphia and Buffalo, and I'm like, okay, well, you know what? This line's down to 1.5 now with Jacksonville. I can use a 10-point teaser and get Jacksonville plus 8.5, and just have Philadelphia and Buffalo pick. And I'm not just taking any random double-digit favorites. I was betting Philadelphia and Buffalo anyway. So I married those three-team combination. And then I'm looking at the Minnesota game this week. And, I was rooting for the 3, and I really didn't want to lay 3.5 or 4. And then I missed the 3.5 because I was having computer issues. I couldn't find the stupid game on the TV. I mean, I feel like I'm like a senile old man. I can't find where the World Series games are or where the football games are. I mean, or is NFL on Amazon Prime, or is it on streaming ESPN? Is it on ABC, CBS, ESPN, NBC? I don't know where to find these games anymore. And I wasted 15 minutes looking for the damn game. And then I couldn't find my phone for 10 minutes, and the Minnesota game moved. Enough of that. Anyway, I didn't want to take Minnesota -4. I'm like, all right, what can I do here? So in a layered position, not marrying a parlay with 2 games starting at the same time, I'm looking at the night game. I'm like, well, screw this. What's a parlay going to pay with the money line Minnesota and Buffalo? -129. Well, that's not that bad. I would much rather, and I'm looking at it as a Minnesota solo bet. I'm going, okay, fine. The first leg is in, and I'm taking them on the money line. And if that had lost, I would have still bet my Buffalo on the back end. No harm there. And I was going to lose money on Minnesota anyway, -4. So win-win. And I did that, and that was a winner. The third thing that I did, or actually, I waited for the 4 on the Miami, which I think, was imperative to wait and wait and wait. And here's my pet peeve with people selling picks or, trying to share stuff. They want to put picks out for sale, and they put it out early in the week, and they give their clients crappy numbers. And people on, media, they give out crappy numbers because their podcast may be on a given day of the week. That's one of the reasons why we don't discuss, picks in general on our shows, because things change. But the lack of ability to read a market and to pick and time your bets properly, and if you're actually collecting money from people and you're plopping out picks too early, there was no way in hell that line wasn't going up. You had to know better, and you had to be patient. So that was good. But the other thing that I did really well was I couldn't get that stupid 10 on the Buffalo. And a lot of people don't realize this, and don't share this with anybody else. Okay. Whoever's watching this is, that line's 10.5. And you're not supposed to buy points in the NFL. There's very few exceptions, and that is whatever the price is going to be. And if you're buying through the 10 and it's costing you 10 cents each time, that's positive EV now. The 10 has become much more valuable. And you certainly, with the places that aren't overcharging, if it's 10 cents, you buy through that 10. So I laid 9.5 on that Buffalo, and I handicapped that there was going to be a missed field goal at the end, and everything worked out really well for me. So, but every single time, every single game, I'm looking at alternative ways that I can get involved in a game where I don't want to lay that price. How can I think outside the box? And I'll tell you, it was actually a warm feeling that came over me. And I know I'm being long-winded, but this is important stuff. I have not had time this year to stare at a line screen like I have in years past. Like when I was doing this, the 10 years previous, I was like this, like a zombie. And I have not had that time, but I made sure I had time because I got my ass kicked early on Sunday. Everything was just a disaster early on, and it ended up being a winner. But I stared at that screen and I stared at that screen, and I'm going from website to website to website, and I'm looking at all these lines and all these options, and I'm like, God, I got to do more of this. And I cannot recommend strongly enough that everybody watching this video take advantage of the free line service being offered through the Super Bowl from Spank Odds. Absolutely imperative. I'm sorry, you're an idiot if you do not contact them. And even if you learn nothing, at least have that line service, look at it, absorb whatever you can absorb by watching how the market moves. And just an amazing opportunity that you will never get ever again, because that service is going to be $500 or more a month after the Super Bowl. Take advantage of this opportunity to try that out. So sorry for the long-winded explanation. It's kind of just, but that's good stuff. It's really good stuff. I'm telling you.
Okay, now my long-winded response, not rebuttal, but I think there are two parts to what you said. Number one, there's a lot of advanced stuff that you're talking about there in terms of creatively do some different things. Some people do it in game, some people do it other ways. On our Friday show with Ted, we talked about Seattle, and you talked about the Seattle money line. I talked about Seattle. I knew I was going to play them, but I didn't know how comfortable I would be with the 3. How was I going to deal with that? Did I want to deal with the inflated money line? So I did something similar to you because Seattle was in such an unbelievable situation via the power ratings, via the metrics, via the travel of the New York Giants, and the stat I shared, or that was 28% with a sample size that was very high. Everything was going against the Giants, but I still didn't know whether I wanted to do it at -3. So I did a portion at -3, but I also did it on the money line, but also did it at a money line parlay similar to you to drive the price down. I didn't do it with Philly, which I should have because they were in a good situation, but it was a low sample size, so I didn't want to deal with that. But Buffalo was in a much better situation. I had no intention of betting that game. I had no intention of giving Aaron Rodgers double-digit points. But if I can narrow it down a little bit with a money line parlay to Seattle to make the price favorable, then I could do that. So I have used money line parlays. I don't use teases, but I have used money line parlays to drive down prices when the metrics say that I'm in a good situation already. But I do want to offer this as well. We're thankful that we have a lot of viewers. We get about 500 looks or something like that via YouTube, probably some other ways that people listen to it that doesn't contribute to the count. Whatever it is, we're very thankful of that. And we know not everybody who listens is as an experienced a bettor, or that they have time to look at the line screens as much, and so on and so forth. So they're not going to always come up with the second level things. My only word of caution is don't try this at home if you're not comfortable with it. If you're new to this and you're new to the summer series that we put out, and what Chris is talking about and some of our exchanges and how we're getting into, take it one step at a time. Look at our straight betting strategies more than looking at this. Kind of divide up what you said, Chris, into advanced level metrics for those who are ready for it. And the others, just take notes. And when you're ready for it, start asking us questions about it, or particular asking Chris questions about it. Chris will answer all your questions, but don't leap before you're ready.
Yeah, very well said. And I couldn't have said it better myself. You just want to be aware of this stuff. Don't sit there and try to run before you can walk with certain stuff. Just, keep certain stuff. If you don't understand certain concepts, just keep it in the back of your thought process. And at some point through osmosis, hopefully it'll benefit you down the road, and it will come from your subconscious. But it's you like, here's something dumb. You don't tease to 10. Okay. You try is, referencing what you said, Ron. Okay. People want to get cute with teasers and they think they know what they're doing. You don't tease to a 10. I mean, how silly. I mean, it's just, I'm telling you, you don't tease through a 10. You're not going through enough key numbers. And you don't tease strange combinations of numbers for the sake of doing it. And as far as parlays and teasers go, I don't recommend generally marrying those into a kind of a brick and mortar relationship. When I'm doing parlays or teasers, I'm putting them to work. They're doing multiple things. They're helping me in more ways than one. And I try to put myself as oftentimes as possible in a position where if the first part of it goes down, okay, that's fine. It wasn't a frivolous, low EV wager. It's putting me in a better position with two different things I'm doing anyway. And I always have that opportunity on the back leg to reset whatever is in that hole number 2, because it starts at a different time. I can take action. So, that's, a few pieces of advice that I have.
Yeah, it's different purposes that you're doing it. You're not doing like a lot of people. They have to have teases during the week because that's a losing proposition. And the other thing I would recommend is if you're in a losing streak, you're losing a game by 2 or 3 points or something's going wrong or whatever, and you're not seeing it. It's just not working for you. Don't use teases as a crutch that way. You should never be at your weakness going to a tease scenario. You should be at your strength when you're going to teases. I mean, that's just wasting money, in my opinion.
Yeah, and you know what? You touch on something. When I was focusing on the screen and I had some time, and I go, I was coming from a point of confidence, not desperation. It's like, okay, I know exactly what's going to go on. How can I maximize my value? And how can I buy myself insurance? I'm not sitting there going, oh my God, what can I possibly do? And I'm just trying to seek out stuff. I had specific games or specific game or situations that I'm focusing on and trying to build the alternatives on that. Don't do it the back asswards way out of desperation, as Ron said, just to have plays.
Now, I've got to tell you, this story has come up multiple times, especially when friends of mine, when I had more friends of mine that were wagering, and I'm sure you've heard this in the past. And it's a terrible strategy. I would hear countless number of times, let's say the line was 7 and my friend liked the favorite. They say, I'm not 100% sure I'm going to win by 7, so I'm going to tease it down to pick them. If you're not 100% sure, if you're not confident in your bet to begin with, why are you teasing it? Because, if you're thinking that's a 50-50 proposition, whether they're going to win or they're not going to win or something like that, I just don't think you should be thinking of teases unless you're thinking of it from strength. I like this play and I'm willing to put it in combination in a working method with other things, not because I don't know about this play, but maybe if I change it to 7 more points, I'm going to work it out. Doesn't work.
Well, I think this week there are a handful of situations where you really have to look at the benefit of using teasers, and like Jacksonville, for example, they just want to lose every game by a field goal. They want to they're always in there at the end. If you can get them over a 7, that's a pretty good spot there. And that is a situation where if you've lost 4 or 5 weeks in a row with these clowns, and your metrics say you're supposed to bet them again, do you sit there and say, thank you, may I have another? Or do you sit there and go, all right, I've had it with the straight bets, but they're supposed to cover the straight bet, and the metrics say they're supposed to cover the straight bet. I'm not going to bet them the straight bet. I'm going to give myself the 6 or 7 points of insurance, and I'm going to put them in play anyway, because I'm not just going to quit them. I'm not going to be the Jake Gyllenhaal.
But luckily, I haven't been involved in Jacksonville, so not very much. I haven't been on that particular bandwagon. I want to say one more thing before we move on to any other topics, and that's a lot of the time in the off season, I'm back testing a lot of stuff. That's when you can do your work and prepare for the next season. I'm back testing situations. I'm going back through the data and so on. If the game has changed, if the rules have changed, back testing doesn't work. And back testing doesn't work on a particular team if there are a lot of coaching and personnel changes. But for general NFL situations with scoring, with running data, with pass percentages, with sack data, and so on, I'm constantly looking at the data to try to find edges. And I think back testing is a good way to get involved and get more knowledgeable about the NFL in particular. And maybe we'll have some of that stuff in the off season and we can share some of the back testing. But I'm doing that for the college and the NFL an awful lot, because it's, since I don't handicap other sports, I have time to do it.
Just to be clear, what is your definition of back testing, and how do you go through that process?
Well, for example, I'll give you a general example. James Madison, not the president, but the school, moved up to Division I and had their scores, their whole schedule. They're entering the Sun Belt and so on and so forth. So now I have to decide, okay, where am I going to start with them? What power rating am I going to do? How am I going to judge this? So I'm going through and I'm back testing where my numbers are and how I would do it with a particular team and where they fit in, so that I'm not going completely out of the cold. I'm looking at 5 years of data, all the games they've played, looking up Sagarin ratings, trying to figure out where they would fit with other teams. And I'm trying to assign a provisional power rating for that particular team. So that would be one type of back testing. If I'm back testing a situation, then if I'm looking at how many times has a team, their third game on the road, what has happened when they are on their third game on the road? Are they a road favorite in the third game? Are they a road dog on the third game? Are they coming off a win? Are they coming off a double-digit loss? I'm just looking at different situations and trying to pile up the sample size and seeing whether or not I could see anything that might give me an edge. And a lot of the back testing leads to nothing, just like a lot of experiments in life are just experiments, and you don't come up with a new drug or the remedy or the vaccine. You're just looking for the 1 out of 10 back testing that works. So those are examples I can come up with off the top of my head. That would be my definition.
Okay. Sorry, I got distracted there a little bit.
One other thing that I know I'm going to back test next year, since we've been talking about it, I will back test throwing out week 1 data for the last 2 or 3 years.
And I'm actually going to, my idea of the back testing is that I have my metrics, and what I did was I originally had a certain range of the number had to be outside this range to qualify as a play. And when scoring elevated back 2016, I widened it just a little bit. and I need to go back test to see if I have been costing myself, not narrowing the margin a little bit. So I'm just going to go back week by week by week and see, basically what the results would have been if I had narrowed my criteria just a little bit more. So I'm kind of looking forward to that, because 11, 12 plays a week isn't enough in the NFL. I'm looking to get more.
Well, actually, I was looking to reduce plays using that same example in college, because the scoring in college is just out of whack. And I'm using my power numbers when they're a certain amount off. It's a play automatically and so on. But in the college favorites, when they're 3.5 points or more off, they're now hitting much lower than they ever used to, because I use sliding 5-year scales. I may have mentioned that in the past. I don't care what happened 30 years ago. I care what happened the last 3 years, the last 5. So I'm using scales. And right now, power rating favorites are 51.3% over the last 5 years. So they're doing me no good, power rating favorites. Why do I want them in my portfolio? So I need to do something like you're saying. Well, now that there's more scoring, maybe I need to be 4 points off instead of 3.5 points off. Does that change it? What happens there? So that's an excellent point, because some of the rules have changed, or some of the scoring has changed. Maybe some of our methods need to be tweaked just a little bit.
Yeah, and if you're talking, football, 1 year is nothing.
Right.
It's not enough to sit there and move forward with any sort of strategy with confidence. You really need to go back years. And there, you have to have the consistency with the rules and some similar type situations, because if you've got big differences from year to year, well, now you can't back test it. It doesn't do you any good. So
right.
I tweeted out that I made Minnesota. Somebody inquired on DM what I would have made the Dallas Minnesota line. And we both agreed Dallas -1, no dispute there. Was that on no, that was in Minnesota. And then the other question was on a neutral, Minnesota versus Green Bay. And I put out a 7.5 on Minnesota, and I'm getting skewered. I can see on my DM or on my notifications, so I'll have to respond to those. And you skewered me also. So where would you put that line?
Well, according to my numbers, I'd make it 4.
Okay.
On neutral 4. Maybe because I'm not as high on Minnesota. They're not in my top 5. And I know it may not be in yours either, but you have Green Bay may be rated lower than other people right now. And I can understand that. I mean, Green Bay is certainly underperformed, and they look like they're going through the motions with their play calling and everything like that. But my power ratings are generally mechanically driven. That doesn't mean I don't take into account all the other metrics and situations and so on. I'm certainly not a Green Bay fan this year. But based on my numbers, it comes out to about 4 right now. There's room for Minnesota to move up. Do they play this week?
Yes, they're playing Washington.
Yeah, well, my number is correct on that game. And the Green Bay-Detroit game.
What do you mean your number's correct?
Well, according to my power ratings, Minnesota at Washington is the line that I would set.
Yeah, but are you setting your power ratings based on how well you think these teams, are going to perform, or are you setting them on where you think the spread should be?
No, it's complete where I think the spread should be based on my numbers. I use them completely independent, because I have that set, and then I say, well, wait a second, I have this data that says I should be all over Minnesota. And then I have situations. I've got 3 things going on all at once for every game: the power rating, the actual on-field metrics, the data that I value, just like you value your metrics, and then any situations that come into play. That middle of the year, there aren't as many situations that I have to deal with anyway. So all 3. And then when I have a marriage between them all, like with Seattle, it's a good thing. But I didn't have I haven't looked at the game from that standpoint. I'm about a day behind in looking at all the metrics and everything. But based solely on my power ratings, the line is set correctly.
Okay. The metrics, this game isn't even close, but I know that people are going to like the situation, and the situation probably does carry more weight in this situation. And I do respect that situation for it being favorable with Washington. But I don't think it overcomes, basically how the performance is seen. Where do you have Green Bay out of one out of 32?
Probably right in the middle. There are some bad teams in this league. Houston's bad. Indy's bad. I have the Jets rated lower than Green Bay, and for good reason, I think. I have Chicago rated lower. I have Washington rated lower. I have the Lions rated lower. I have Atlanta rated lower. I have Carolina rated lower.
Where do you have Minnesota?
Minnesota's probably about 8th or 9th.
Okay.
1, 2. Where do you have Minnesota?
7.
I might have Minnesota high. I might have Minnesota higher because are there a lot of teams on buys that are good? Because I don't have them.
We got a big bye week. We've got Cleveland, Dallas, Denver, the Giants, Pittsburgh, San Francisco.
Okay, so 2 of those teams are higher than Minnie. And then I got Philly higher, Buffalo higher. I have Cincinnati just a tad higher still.
Okay.
That's all I have. So maybe they're 6th.
But I don't know how. I don't understand how you could have Green Bay middle of the road. They're abysmal. They are number 32, trailing last 5 weeks in the NFL. Their recent performance is the worst in the entire NFL, and they're 2 games under 500. The team is in complete disarray. To think that the Green Bay Packers are an average team, they are not an average team. They are below average.
Yeah. Remember that power ratings are also used for me to determine line movement as well. So in some cases, that helps me decide when to wait on a play and when to act on a play, much like you decided with the Detroit game last week. I agree with you. We knew which way the line was going. It wasn't going down. So that's, if anything else, power ratings will help me decide whether or not, and if my line is really off, then I have to question whether or not I made a mistake on my power ratings. Exactly. And if I haven't.
And you have to be willing to pivot. Here's an example. I'm never going to dig in. I'm going to be wrong lots of times. And I'm obviously wrong on this 7.5, by the way. The more I think about it, I just basically sent out what my rating was without thinking about the market enough. And logically, it would be all Green Bay action. They did show signs of life at the end of the Buffalo game. I just don't think people understand how bad this Green Bay team is, and is factoring in all the other, peripheral issues with Rodgers and such. But I think Minnesota would get pounded up from a 4. I would be rethinking this. I think a 6. 5.5, 6 is actually where this line would be, belong in a true betting market.
Yeah, you could never set it that high because typical to Ohio State, Michigan, USC, and that kind of stuff, divisional games where the teams know each other and stuff like that, you're not going to get as much of a fair line between 2 generally competitive teams unless you got a really bad team in the division versus a really good team in the division. So I'm speaking off the top of my head, but in general, you get about a half-point difference in divisional games in markup and power rating. Just something to throw out there to people.
No, you're exactly right. And, this is a lesson to be learned, that you don't dig in on anything. Hey, I laid myself out there. I'm wrong. I'll go out there and say I was wrong. And I'm fine with that. There's no room for ego in what we're trying to do. We're trying to help each other, trying to learn. We do the best we can, and we're going to be wrong sometimes. So accept it. Don't dig into whatever hole you put yourself into. And if you don't dig in, you can get out easily. So this is one of the longest shows we've had. I think it's one of the best shows we've had. I hope people found value in some of the stuff that we said. And do you have any final thoughts, Mr. Ron?
Yeah, one final thought. As we've talked about these trades that happened, now the homework assignment for myself, for others as well, is to go back and see what impact they might have as early as this week. And if we learned anything from Christian McCaffrey, it could have an impact a little bit early. What is Bradley Chubb bring right now in this situation to this team? What does Roquan Smith bring right now to this situation? So whatever my power rating number, whatever my offensive line versus defensive line metric was 2 days ago, might change just a little. So a little bit of homework there.
Yeah, and exactly, because that stuff's going to be important. How is Chicago? I'm interested. When we're going to chat about this maybe on Friday, if we get a chance, I'm interested to see how Chicago is going to react on this. A lot of moving parts with Chicago right now, and their performance has been up and down. Chicago is probably one of the most interesting teams, and along with Miami at this point, that stick out. We're going to be back on Friday. Colts at the Patriots we're going to focus a little bit on, and the Rams at Tampa Bay, as we all knew this was going to be a banner game at the beginning of the season. Is sure not to disappoint anybody except the teams that have their draft picks.
Yeah.
With that, we'll say goodbye. Thanks for joining us. Always feel free to I've been remiss in responding to comments. I just have not had the time in the YouTube channels and stuff. Ron, you got all kinds of time on your hands because you're not on vacation this week for once. So maybe you can hit those up, and I will try to look at them. We appreciate all the people that reach out and make comments, and very few people have yelled at us, which is kind of nice. So we must be doing something right. We'll be back on Friday. Inside Blitz. Thanks for joining.